All right, everybody, let's get started, shall we? This, as I said in my introductory question thing, this is so far as we know, our last book club. It's definitely our last book club this season. Desiree and I have been working quite assiduously and creatively, especially Desiree, in writing a letter that we're going to send out to various people and associations and whatnot, asking for support so we can continue this program, because we're pretty certain that ScanDesign, that has been our main sponsor, is not going to continue, as they have chosen to spend their money in going in different directions. This, of course, is really, really sad news for us, because we would love to have them as our partner and backing us up as they have been. And you also know that, I have my cheat sheet where I'm also saying that we've also been supported by the Danish American Heritage Society, and I'm hoping we can continue to count on their support, and finally by the University of Washington Scandinavian Studies Department. So we're hoping and we're trying, and we would love to continue. So right now we're working on this and trying to be as professional and savvy, all the things. We're not really when it comes to business, but we're trying to do this the right way, and we will definitely make sure that you're all kept up to date about what happens. Everybody who's on our email list will be informed. And then we are hoping for a positive outcome so that we can continue with a proud season 3. Desiree and I have loved everything we've done so far, and Tova has been an amazing administrative support. So we have nothing but, praise for all of you participants, everything that's been going on. It's been so much fun and such a joy to be sharing literature with you all that we would hate to see it fall by the wayside. But right now, we don't know, and we can't say what's going to happen. So we are just looking forward to the next hour when we're going to talk about, hello, Hannah.
Hi.
Hi, we're going to talk about our last book of this season, and we want it to go to Greenland. So when you go to Greenland, there are various people that you can read. One of them is Kim Leine, who has been a favorite in past book clubs and discussions. His books are very long, like 500 to 700 pages, because he takes a very historical approach to Greenland. So we decided that this time we would go with the new, young Greenlandic voice, Niviaq Korneliussen, who's been labeled by everybody the coming Greenlandic kind of, I guess you could say maybe identity, and definitely a writer to be reckoned with. She's already won awards, and she's very young. Desiree was trying to manage an interview with her, but was told that she was on maternity leave and therefore was not doing any interviews right now. So we will just have to be happy with talking about her book. She has written other books that are also translated, so you can keep looking if you like her Greenlandicness and Greenlandic voice. And if you want to know more about those issues between Denmark and Greenland that she's touching on, then there's certainly other books also to be read, especially by Kirsten Tisted, who has just written, I'll put her in the chat so you have her name. She's just written a book in English about the new North Atlantic. So let me see.
And Desiree, is that who you're hoping to connect with?
Yes, I have an interview scheduled with her.
So Desiree, go in there now, and I will try to write something in the chat, everyone.
So while Nete does that, I have an interview scheduled with Kirsten Tisted on May 16th. And we will be talking about Greenlandic literature, but also like colonialism and the relationship between Greenland and Denmark, and what is a Danish writer, what is a Greenlandic writer, but and identity, having one or more cultures, I guess. I'm still preparing, so I'm a little fluffy in my wording of what the topics will be. But yes, we have the May 16th scheduled, and as soon as I have that, the same afternoon, I usually send it to Tova, and then the museum will do their thing for the intro and outro, and it should be available shortly after the 16th for you guys.
Yeah,
Now,
so
the
give us a few days.
TV show Bargain, that touched on the
Mhm.
relationship, the political relationship between Greenland and Denmark. So if you don't already read a 500-page book, then you can, watch 4 seasons of this. Was this book translated from
go.
Greenlandic or Danish?
Ooh, I think it was Greenlandic. I think she writes in Greenlandic. But
I would assume
that's
so.
a good question, Susan. I did not check that. Because a lot of the Greenlandic writers in the past and politicians, they do kind of both. We had a visit at some point of a Greenlandic delegation at the University of Wisconsin, and they were all speaking Danish, but among themselves, some of them would speak Greenlandic. So it was a very interesting reception after the official part. So most of them are very fluent in both languages and can choose either for their presentation. But I'm so glad that Desiree got Kirsten Tiste, who is a long-standing expert on Greenland, speaks Greenlandic, has lived there, and is just very much immersed in the Greenlandic culture, that she's willing to give us an interview, because she definitely knows what she's talking about. And I think that the Greenlandic, pardon?
It's thanks to you, because I was kind of at my wit's end when I got that email that she was on maternity leave, and you were like, hey, how about Kirsten Tiste? So I was like, okay.
But that's it, because
Thank you.
I've always been very impressed. This is an aside with people who speak Greenlandic. It's an incredibly difficult language to learn. And if you read Kim Leine, and I will put his name too, now I put Bowen, but I'll just put in Kim Leine, because then you can look for him. He was a nurse in Greenland, and he is amazing. He's just the most amazing storyteller. And he set as his goal that he was going to learn Greenlandic 1 word a day. So 1 word a day. And maybe some of you have tried learning a language, that's not very much, but it was enough, he said. It was just so difficult. And he explains and describes that very interestingly. So I really like that. All right, enough preliminary talk here. I want to go to one sentence that I wanted to read to you. And that's on page 22 in my book. But even so, I don't want to go back to my comfort zone. My comfort zone is gone. And I thought that was a very interesting statement that kind of covered the entire book. And the other thing I wanted to read was on page, I'm just going to it, 92. And these are different, of course. She says, oh, my whole apartment is spotless, but my hands are still dirty. This is Sarah. We are at the end. And she says, today must remain pure. Polluted thoughts must not ruin this day of purity. Today, my hands must not get dirtier. So we have comfort zone, we have dirty hands. And then, if you don't mind, I would actually like to ask you all who have read the book, what do you think about my last question? Why has this writer been awarded prizes? Why has she been labeled the new voice of Greenland, the new identity that we really need to reckon with? Did any of you think about that? Because I thought that would be an interesting place to start.
I did wonder why she had been awarded prizes. I assume has something to do with new styles of writing, because I honestly have to say I did not like the book at all. So, but I'm old, and I do find that this is a new style of writing that I have encountered occasionally before. I don't know, because I know so little about Greenlandic culture that I couldn't even begin to answer that question. But yes, I did think about it.
Anybody else?
Well, maybe because it's coming from Greenland and it's a new culture to most of the people that are exposed to it, but it seemed to me to be a fairly common coming of age story and coming of identity story. Now, set against Greenland or a place like Indonesia, this is a real big deal. People die for their identities in these places.
Yes.
So I don't know what it is with the Greenland, but Arnak really just blew that guy's cover that, you know, her friend was having an affair with a closeted politician. So it must be some big deal there if someone is not cisgendered.
But I thought it was more pertinent that he was married.
Well,
Then
married,
sexual
closeted, married,
orientation was,
something.
you know, that
Yeah.
most places frown on politicians having adulterous affairs, you know, except in England. I don't know. Well, I guess they do too. But,
Do you mean where they get used to it? Hi, Suzanne.
Yeah.
Welcome.
and the royal family set such an example that, yes, I think they've had so many sex scandals in England that they're used to it, you know. But I don't know. I thought to get to the point that it was more a question that he was married than that he was gay. But I don't know enough about the culture to say, so I don't know.
Does it have everybody, when you think of Greenlandic culture, okay, you think of, oh, I'm sorry, Desiree, did you have your hand up or?
Well, it's pretty much in line with, I was just thinking more like it almost cynically that for a publishing house perspective, she fits the queer bill, she fits the indigenous bill, like to have someone like her who can also write in her stables. These days you have to have diversity, you have to have multiple voices, and she fits that bill, I think, and she's a youngish writer, so she'll have more books probably coming out. So she's kind of a good bet. It sounds maybe cynical, but that's
Yeah. Well, she has it all, inclusivity and diversity and equity. Yes, you're right.
authenticity, all that. Like she's not a voice talking about Greenland, she is a Greenlander herself, and she can even write and talk in Danish. So how convenient for the Danish audience, right?
But she's also quite intelligent, so that also helps too. So yeah.
But back to the question about being gay and being outed. What do you think? Is it a problem in Denmark? Would it be a problem in Denmark? We've read various books from Denmark. Do you have a feeling about this Danish culture? Is it a problem in Greenland? Why would it be? Oh, and by the way, Greenland has about 55,000 people living in Greenland, and about 15 to 16,000 of these live in Nuuk. Last night in Nuuk, which is the capital. And so it's a very small population. So how do you feel about the identity of a man, the identity of a woman in Greenland? Can you perceive anything about that might explain why this politician, Miki, is so afraid of recognizing maybe his own gay side and definitely doesn't want it to be publicized?
It seemed to me like that would be the end of his career, since that news had gone out, or that news had been reported that he had been in a relationship or had, well, I don't know about the length of the relationship. I don't remember that.
No.
But I guess I did think that it was such an upsetting situation, because not just because he was married, but because he was having a homosexual relationship. So I guess I thought it had maybe more to do with sexuality for someone in that position than that he was married. I don't know. I have no idea.
Denmark, same-sex marriage is legal. I don't know, is it legal in Greenland?
Yes, it is legal in Greenland. I actually looked up some history. When I started reading this book, one of my husband's friends, has traveled to Greenland with a band to perform a couple times. When he came back, the first thing he said was, "I think all the men in Greenland are gay." And I thought, come on, maybe it was your band. I don't know. I just thought that was an interesting comment to make.
Yeah.
He's been there more than once. So I was looking it up last night, and they actually had fairly liberal laws about homosexuality in Greenland, more so than Denmark even. But Denmark passed legal marriage being legal, but and then Greenland also. But Greenland had for many years that it was okay to have, not to be married, but homosexuals could live together without, having the stigma that I guess other parts of the world had. So I was a little bit confused looking at what I read about the people in Greenland, and then this book where people seem to be concerned about coming out or concerned about being found out or whatever. So I had trouble reconciling that, but I did. I mean, it is legal, the marriage is legal, and apparently there has been an openness toward homosexuality in Greenland. They did say that a large number of women are leaving Greenland. More women than men leave Greenland and go to Denmark because of the opportunities that are available.
Okay, historically speaking, 1989, Denmark was the first country in the world to accept same-sex marriage. Two men were proudly married only in the city hall. 2012, you could be married in the church as well, the state church. So in between, you just had what was, a legal partnership and a marriage that was civil marriage. And then after that, the church also accepted it, and you could do whatever you wanted to do. And you have the same rights. You can adopt kids. You can do whatever. You have the same rights as marriages that are of heterosexual people. So thank you, Anita, for that. I mean, looking that up. But I think that if you think about Greenland in the past, then the male personality, the main male identity was as the provider. And this is where you can read other books that describe the past of Greenland. The man would be the one that would catch the seals, that would provide the food, and the women would be the ones that stayed in the villages and prepared the food and made sure not everybody starved every time there was some kind of famine. So a very, very separate gender roles that were taken just indiscriminately by the two sexes. And then that would make the demand on the man to be the masculine character very strong. And that might explain part of this kind of abhorrence that is explained and described in the book of, he cannot be outed. He's a public servant. He's a member of the parliament in Greenland. And that's why, more so than him being married and having children, etc. So because it doesn't seem like cheating is such a big deal. At least that's how I kind of saw it. But Hannah.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I recently reread Jørgen Rives trilogy about Greenland. I don't know how many people are familiar with that. I read it many years ago when it was first published, and I was curious whether it would seem dated or politically incorrect or something now. And I actually didn't. I found it excellent again, and educational and entertaining. And of course, that was just one author's view, and he is Danish, although he's lived in Greenland for many years. But I got the impression that going way back in that culture, way back, that they had a little bit of a different arrangement when it came to relationships between men and women, and men and men, women and women, and sharing, and just they were not that faithful, if that's a right word, and that was totally accepted. And maybe that was a necessity when you live such a harsh life, where you can easily die. from, having to get your food and, just your whole lifestyle and the nomadic lifestyle and all the traveling.
I think that's great, Hannah, because I think that that's also in the books that you can read. Other authors, definitely that definition of having a wife is not necessarily something that just you have, but maybe somebody who can be shared. And,
Yes.
and if somebody feels the need for sex, then you can have it with whomever. So a pretty relaxed approach to that compared maybe to what we're used to, or the more faithful approach you would have in a Danish society. So interesting, but maybe that's also just the reason that she's so acknowledged, because this is the way she explains it. This is the new transgender, I mean, the rebirth. What did you think of that? The rebirth of Niviaq, who suddenly discovers that she is a he, and feels safe and happy and comfortable in that new identity. It, to me, seemed like a rebirth that was described.
Yes,
Did
I
anyone-
agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree too. I was about to ask when we had finished talking about how acceptable coming out in homosexual relationships was. What is it like for transgendered individuals? Is that accepted? Is it, but does anyone know how Greenland culture views transsexual relationships or transsexual individuals?
Sarah seems to accept it very easily. I mean,
Yes.
she seems to recognize it and accept it very easily. So I'm wondering if that's not an indication. Of course, it's a very small population too.
Right.
So the incidence of transgender people is very, 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 very low percentage. So I would assume in a very small population, you wouldn't really encounter people who are transgender very much, but I don't know.
Okay.
Suzanne?
I thought that the explanation of, in the glossary, the explanation of the various names as being male, female, sometimes male, sometimes both, must indicate that there is more fluidity between, I guess that's the right preposition, the genders. And particularly, well, I mean, in general, okay. But I mean, I think especially that, these are young people that we're talking about.
Yeah.
I thought her
Everything is
choice
more
of name
accepted.
was more archetypal than actually. In other words, so-and-so represents women, so-and-so represents men, so-and-so I just thought there were more, the names were chosen for being archetypal as symbolic of the characters. And so then they could change from one gender to the other, one perception to another, but I don't know, because I don't know the incidence of these names in Greenland. I know nothing about Greenland, I have to say.
I don't know about what it is like in Greenland, but if I compare to my Danish friends who have teenage kiddos or young adults, I think it's more our generation and older that are so consumed with gender labels. At least from what I experienced, they don't care.
Yeah.
They are way more experimenting, and it's not that important to them. They're human beings, at least those that I talk to and the parents I talk to, they don't understand why the parent generation and the grandparent generation are so obsessed with having to figure out what kind of identity or gender or sexuality the younger generation has. And I find that very refreshing, quite honestly.
Yeah, I do too. Yeah.
And
I find it very confusing, Desiree. I just read an article about a family with 3 kids that had genderless names.
I saw that too in Jyllandsposten. I saw that one. Yeah.
Saying, okay, what are they? But there's also been, oh my gosh, was that a writer from Wisconsin? Or there's been an American woman who wrote a book about that at least 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And the questions and problems pertaining to choosing a name that is no gender for, or no sex for your child. So yeah.
That's
It's definitely
I don't know how I feel about that. I mean, it's whatever, people can do whatever, but I do feel that oftentimes in our household, at least, my teenage daughter has so often like put me in my place and said, why is this important to you? Why do you label it like that? That when you do that, this means that. And sometimes I'm like, okay, give me a break, you know who I am. But it is very healthy to be pushed, right? And to be questioned about my worldview that is maybe stagnating a little bit. And then she's like showing this is not how we do things anymore. And I really, sometimes I secretly roll my eyes at some things, but it's an important discussion to have.
I think it's a positive step forward for people to not be so rigid in their classifications of people. And I often don't find, I resent classifications a lot. I don't like being labeled. I don't like to label other people. And I think if we were more fluid and were more accepting, we'd have a lot more peaceful society, a lot, at least in this country, not as polarized. I think it's really a positive step forward for humankind to be more accepting of this. So, yeah.
I want to question what you're saying there, Susan, because labeling, I mean, if you're a man, if you're a woman, is that a label or is it something you are? So, I mean, that's, you know, that's a question of wording again. But I'd like also, because I know we can talk about this for a long time, but we have a few other problems, questions, issues in the book, such as, for example, alcoholism, alcohol, the alcohol culture. I don't know what we think about that. We also have unemployment and what to do with oneself, where to live, how to kind of subsist here in this culture. So it's not just focused. I mean, what she does is not just focus on sexual identity. It's definitely a lot of sex, a lot of drinking, and a lot of who am I, and so on. And then we finish with Sarah. And that's where I was asking you if you felt like I did, that maybe there's a hope for a better future. Maybe this birth is leading on to something else. But so going back, what do you think of, for example, our Nuuk, who is, I guess, the prime example of the woman who feels that she has to keep on drinking? Why is that?
Well, her relationship with her father, you know, is incestuous and it's ongoing, and she feels she needs the money. And that's pretty big, you know.
I was going to say that too, I think.
But is it a valid excuse? Like it's being questioned in the book, right? Like take responsibility for your own life. And yes, it's rough for you, blah, blah. I'm not saying that but it's interesting that it's in your face. Like, is it okay for her to be like that because of what she is and has experienced? Or, sorry, I don't want to take over your questions, Nete, but, and then at the same time, in that chapter, she keeps, I get confused with the voices. I don't know if you did, but one voice says, take responsibility for your life, own up to, like, if it's whatever you do is your responsibility, no matter what you have been through. And you can, you know, we can argue about that, but and it's maybe not that black and white, but it's interesting that she really makes it clash.
I mean, to me,
you know.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Danish culture.
Linda or Linda first, and then Susan.
Yeah, to me, part of the Danish culture in Denmark is drinking at a younger age than here in the United States. And part of the culture, the Greenlandic culture, from what I get in the book, is that, yeah, to go out and binge is like, okay, so you got fucked up, you did this and that. Oh, well, the drink, the devil made you do it. But when you get right down to it, drugs are a lot better than drinking. No calories. And, you know, you can really blot stuff out. So it wasn't really mentioned that they were into drugs. What it mentioned was a lot of binge drinking going on. And so I don't know, is part of Greenlandic culture, you know, drinking at an early age and it's okay?
Yes, I can answer that. It is okay because Another thing that surprised me when I learned it was that when there are parties in the high school, junior college in Greenland, condoms are, very easily available and handed out. And so you can at least try not to get pregnant because it's assumed that you will drink a lot and lose any kind of responsibility. So, but I think it's what Desiree says, it's right to link this take responsibility for your own life to the fact that Arnak does not seem to be able to take responsibility or to stop her drinking or to know what she's saying when she's drunk or what she's doing, while at the same time, she's kind of preaching to others, she's preaching to Fia saying, oh, maybe you're into women, here, let's fuck and I'll show you what it's like. So she's got such a, for me, confused personality and confusing personality that cannot be healthy. She seems to me to be a person who is falling apart.
She's totally self-centered. That's one of the things I didn't like. I found it strange. So, okay, I didn't like that character when I met her. Incredibly self-indulgent, self-centered. And then you're hit with the fact, like, I don't know, 20 pages or 30 pages later, that she was abused as a child.
Yeah.
So then it's like, now I feel guilty for not liking her because she's a survivor of a horrible trauma. But nonetheless, she's very self-destructive. So yeah, it's okay to drink. It's your business, it's your life, but she's destroying herself. And I have to say that I really didn't appreciate the 2-page kind of description of her puke. I really didn't need to know what puke looked like and what was in it. So that's the new literature. I could have done
okay,
that.
Susan, can I just say, right, you remember our book from last month. She was also abused. She was definitely also a survivor. How come she did not end up a stinking drunk or whatever you want to call it, a really binge drinking person?
But she took responsibility for herself. She took responsibility.
And she also
for
had a
herself,
social worker.
She did. She had a social.
Yeah, my impression is that Scandinavians have so much more mental health care available to them than in this country. It's just my impression. And boy, she really needs it. I mean,
but she doesn't want it at this point, does she? I mean, she never seems to self-reflect that maybe I shouldn't be doing this. So what she would be someone to seek it out. So.
Sandra, you are so surprising me when you say that, because I have always felt that in the US, there is way more attention to mental health issues than in Denmark. It may be generational because I definitely was brought up in a generation where, no, you did not see a professional psychologist, psychiatrist. You figured it out. You had friends, you had family, and you talked your way through problems. But I think you're right. It has changed. I mean, now it is more easy to get us a caseworker, a social worker, and get help and special needs help. But for me, it's always been, the US, it's so easy to get a psychologist and you can just go and have some kind of, Woody Allen life. And I've always found that quite interesting and off-putting in a way also, because it seemed too easy. Why don't you work on your own responsibility? So that it was my gut reaction. Yes, she needs to take control of her own life. And I think it is maybe a generational thing that I'm way off there, because it's not easy to take control today.
I think the world was not as depressing a place when we were growing up as when she's growing up. So, I mean, the Greenland glaciers are melting. So, the hope for the future probably is not what we experienced when we thought we could change the world, by marching in the streets. And I don't know how much we changed it. I don't think we really did much good at all. But at least we had hope. I don't know that the younger generation has that reservoir of hope. I don't know that many young people. So
what do you think? All you young people? Is there hope?
Speak up, young people.
We have young people. Is there hope for the world?
I'm not young, but maybe I can address it. I have young people in the house.
You are much younger than I am, Desiree, so come on.
So to
You're
us,
from
you
your
are young.
I'm an
generation.
old soul, but okay. I talked to my husband the other day about this because we have some mental health issues in our family, and I'm not sure, Susan, I agree with you. Maybe we had hope and stuff when we were marching, which I did too with my mom. But I think that we look at it differently now. When someone was having challenges when we were younger, at least from my experience in Denmark, they weren't addressed until it was really bad, like if they were in hospital or something. If no one knew words like I am stressed out, or I feel anxiety, or like that was just not something you talked about. But I think it's been there always. Like I grew up during the Cold War. I remember being super scared. I just didn't have a vocabulary for it. And there wasn't the same framework like today. I don't even, we had a school nurse. We didn't have a counselor at my school. And I'll have to second what Nete said. In my experience and talking to friends in Denmark, it's still, at least where I live in America, easier to get an appointment with a family therapist or a psychiatrist or something like that than it is in Denmark.
No, I had read that there is a lack of enough psychologists, whatever, for people, that the people have to wait a longer time for an appointment than here. So maybe it gets to the point when they're hospitalized because there wasn't an earlier intervention. I don't know. So yeah. And also, like I'm from New York, where every other person was in therapy. So I don't know what it's like in the Midwest. So
Oh, you're not in therapy in the Midwest. No, you just go
No.
out and shoot something.
Yes, we were. When I
but
lived in Chicago, I'm from the Midwest. I lived in Chicago 15 years and I worked for IBM, and we all got free therapy if we wanted it. So we all just got it, you know.
yeah.
So when I was in Copenhagen, I was part of an EU project where the aim was to get Greenlandic people in Denmark to learn more Danish and to get them ready for the job market. And I was one of the people in that project. And what I discovered was two things. Because they are Danish citizens, they don't have the same rights as, for instance, immigrants that come to Denmark. They don't have the same availability for, or they don't get, you know, first in line as do other nations coming in with TSD or other things. They are treated like Danish citizens, which means that they don't get the same help even if they need it. And secondly, I had to go back to the creators of this EU project and say, you know what, I can't teach them the right pronunciation and how to do a job interview when they don't have a place to sleep at night. There is an order. We have to address like the basic needs before we like. They had a great time in my classroom. They would bring in the white spick. I don't know what the word is in English, and they would, with their very dirty hands, cut off that white fat from the seal and eat it. And you know,
in Alaska, I think that's whale. I think that's whale blubber.
Yeah, some kind of fat that they would cut off and have a warm cup of coffee and some cigarettes and smoke some joints. But it was not really a classroom. It was more like I felt it was more like a shelter. And so I don't know if that has changed, but if you don't treat, if they are Danish citizens, and if you treat them like Danish citizens, but they have Inuit culture coming to Denmark, it's kind of, you want to treat them equally, but then you don't respect that they have a separate culture. Do you have any?
Yeah, you're talking about Maslow's hierarchy. That how can you talk about, you know, spiritual matters or discovering and finding yourself, where yes, you have no place to live, you have nothing to eat, you know, first survival comes first. And yeah, and if it's not acknowledged, at least by the Danish government, if they're bringing people in to train them up, then it's a problem. Because I would imagine living in Greenland and having that culture might be PSTD just in itself. because their
look at-
culture
look-
is different.
Oh, I'm sorry, Linda.
Go ahead, go ahead. No.
I was going to say, look at Nuuk. He goes to Denmark, right? So first, I was very confused about whether he really was in jail or whether it was.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, was it a mental jail he just felt
Yeah.
himself in? Was he really in jail? It doesn't really matter because he was finding his identity, but he goes to Denmark in order to figure out what life should be like for him. And he doesn't find the answer there. He has to find it inside himself. And I think that that's where she writes a very good description of this alienation felt by many Greenlanders when they're faced with the Danish culture. And the Danish culture, similar way, because if you go to Nuuk, I mean, this is last night in Nuuk, if you go to Nuuk and you come there, what you see is a huge statue of the missionary Hans
Yeah.
Egede, who
Yeah.
colonized and baptized the Greenlanders back in the 1700s. And it is in a prominent place looking over Nuuk. If you can imagine, up on a hill, here you have this man who is the worst example of colonization, looking at his community with outstretched outstretched hands,
Yeah.
preach like, and this is how you find your salvation through Jesus Christ. That was how they did it and how they tried to do that. So going to Denmark, trying to find your identity as he does, to me seemed a really sad thing, but also a very expected thing. So I thought she did a good job there of comparing the two sides of Greenlandic and Danish culture. That's not just a happy comparison.
Well, it
Well,
says
he
something
would go
about,
there.
it
he would
says
go
something
there for
about
the
Greenland
rest.
that they haven't torn down the statue, right? I
Mm.
mean, the Samis were forced to go to Swedish schools,
Mhm.
probably forced to go to Norwegian
Yeah.
schools to integrate,
Yeah.
but with no respect to their culture.
Yeah.
So I don't know the history of Greenland, but anywhere the missionaries go, it doesn't usually bode well for the native populations.
And they
Well,
did
all
the same thing. They sent the young Greenlanders to Denmark to learn how to become Danish and go to school in Denmark and learn Danish. And that was seen as the way forward, right? Sorry, Susan, I was interrupting.
No, I was going to say they in Canada, they're discovering bodies from children being sent to the Catholic boarding schools. In Alaska, the Native Americans in the continental United States, they said the first thing that happened to the boys when they were forcibly taken from their families and sent to the boarding schools, they cut their hair because boys should have short hair. And yet, to those particular tribes, it was a sign of power, of yourself. So if there is no respect for the culture that these children usually come from, then how dare you try to turn them into Danish people? How dare you try to turn them into Swedish people assimilation should be something that people seek out, not something that's forced on them.
Yeah.
Maybe they don't want to be Danish.
But do you think that a book like the one we just read, do you think that opens our eyes to these problems or just kind of mires us in their problems without us trying to find a way through it? Because, when I was looking at the book and rereading it and doing the questions, it's like, okay, how can I write positively inspiring questions about a book that to me is so dark? For example, Arnak, she's trying to balance, and is she going to fall? Is she actually going to manage that balancing acts without any emotions? It seems like she's trying to put a lid on her emotions. Do you see what I mean? I was trying to find positive things to focus on, and it felt very, very difficult with this book. Is it a necessary book for us to open eyes and say, we have to do something about a generation of young Greenlanders that are alienated and homeless, both mentally and physically?
I don't know. I don't think it does the story any good focus if you're taking it from that point of view, that shucking the responsibility in life under the guise of being stoned, drunk. I mean, stoned as in drunk and binging. I just finished reading a book for the American-Scandinavian Society called Stolen, and it's about the Sami culture in northern Sweden, bringing up the same kind of internal issues, but against the background of reindeer hunting. And I think the book would have been more successful if more had been brought in about the parents' generation or the generation of where they're coming from, where they're going to.
Yeah,
I think that was missing.
I agree, because my biggest thing with it was you're plunged into the middle of someone's internal dialogue and there's no backstory. There is hardly any backstory given in the whole book. And I'm like, okay, are these just a bunch of drunk kids, or how did they get there? You know, and you're given some, but very little. That was one of my biggest things about the book. There's no backstory, you know.
Good point. And Nete?
When I finished reading the book, I had two questions. The first one was, who was her audience? When she sat down to write this book, who did she think was going to be her audience? And the second one was, what was her intention with the book?
Yeah.
Because if her intention was, in fact, to have this bigger thing of awakening people to, and it's an adult audience of what's happening to young people in Greenland, I don't think you do that in 173 pages or however many it was. And if it's a book where we're supposed to try to understand people who live with different sexuality than we consider the standard, then I don't think it was successful either, because we didn't know enough about these people. We got such a very high level kind of view. Occasionally there'd be some shots come in that tell us a little more about them. But I still don't know who the audience was supposed to be. And I still don't know what her intention was in writing this book.
Great question. Anybody? Has anybody anything to?
Can I say something? It reminds me a little bit of Yahya Hassan. And if you're not familiar with him, he wrote this poetry collection, and all the poets, all the I'm missing the words now. Everything was in a capital letter. So he was shouting at us, and he comes from this immigrant background, and he was talking about his violent dad, and he was talking about trying to be Danish and not feeling Danish, and it created a huge stir in Denmark, because usually you want to hear the good immigrant story, right? You don't want to hear, and he was angry at everyone, his own and Denmark and society and his mom, and I feel this is sort of the same, that she's shouting and she doesn't care, like if we understand. I think it's not so much to help us understand. It's like, this is how I feel, this is who I am, and I'm going to say it. And also, we are sitting here in our middle class, nice backgrounds with our college degrees, and we're used to these like narratives that have a beginning, middle, and end, and all that good stuff. And it's very reminiscent, I think, of at least some young people who have a hard time finding their place in society.
Very good points. Very good.
And I wanted you to think about Jens Sonnergaard. So if you haven't read anything, he was the voice in Denmark in the 90s of the new realism. And his stories are very similar in their brutal approach to identity in life. His first collection of short stories was called Radiator. And that was because his professor at the university had challenged him to write about a radiator and said, you can't write anything interesting about that. And so he did. So a similar harshness for me. So again, I think it's a really good point. Maybe it's just a way to shout at the society and to be heard. Yahya Hassan, I should say, ended up after his second collection of poetry committing suicide. At a very young age of 26. So he really did not find that identity that she here, Niviaq Korneliussen, is seemingly to me trying to find. So maybe yelling and shouting is not enough. You have to find a place to stay. You have to be less homeless than her characters seem. And that's where, going back to Sarah, I felt there was a glimmer of hope with the baby, with a new birth. And there's also a glimmer of hope in the movie I recommended to you called Heart of Light, which is a very good depiction of the clash between the Danish and the Greenlandic culture. So if you don't know anything about it, it really talks a lot about that, and it's now more than 10 years old, I think. Rasmus Lübert, a Greenlandic singer that you can also listen to singing Greenlandic if you Google him, is the protagonist.
What is that name? What was that name?
I put it in the chat, Susan. The movie is called Heart of Light, and Rasmus Lübert has the lead role, and it definitely gives you the clash that we're talking about here. How do you find an identity when your society is changing so rapidly? And he's middle-aged in that movie, so we are talking about also a hatred of the Danes among the young ones who don't know where they are. Should they go to Copenhagen? Should they stay? The University of Nuuk has grown, expanded, and is offering them challenges and chances that they didn't used to have. They used to, to get an education, they needed to go to Denmark. No longer. They can stay put in Greenland and get a higher education. But then the question is, like you were saying, Annette, what are they going to do afterwards? And are they going to move? Where are they going to go to? So
there was a big kerfuffle. There was a big controversy, a lot of backlash. There was a woman, she wrote for the Anchorage Times, I believe, but Elsa somebody, she was not native. But she taught in many native villages for like 30 years. I mean, a long time. And she retired, and the big thing she said that caused people to really denounce her, she said that she was addressing the problems that I think are probably similar, because there's an Inuit culture in Alaska too, and there's Native Alaskans and Indians that I don't know the distinction. She said that one of the reasons they had so many problems in the village, she said flat out, village life is boring.
Yeah.
And she got hit by that. But I can see that, like young people who have, whether they're in Alaska or whether they're in Greenland or wherever they are, who have access to the internet and seeing people do things that seem very enriching and exciting or whatever, don't want to go berry picking with their grandmothers. I mean, to be very blunt about it. So if these Greenlandic kids can get an education at home, rather than going to Denmark, that's good. What are they going to do afterwards? Do they have to build a whole new Greenland that is divorced from Denmark? Because from what I picked up, the Danish attitude towards Greenlanders is very patronizing on a very high level. So are they going to get the education and stay in Greenland, or what are they going to do? And that's a quandary.
But you have to take into consideration, Susan, that the Greenlanders who want independence, they also recognize that without the money from Denmark, they can't survive. So it's such a two-edged sword, because yes, I can see that some people feel patronizing towards Greenlanders, and there's definitely the stereotype of the drunk Greenlander on the streets of Copenhagen. But every kind of attempt at independence also lands, how are we going to support ourselves?
Yeah. Well, that's where education comes in for the young to build their own economy.
And geopolitically, it's a very, very important place now. They will, this is my prediction, they will never get their independence.
Never.
No.
Greenland is like a focal point between the United States and Russia.
Oh,
It
it's
has
so,
huge
unless
security.
Trump comes back and buys it, we will,
Yeah, he'll buy it like he bought Louisiana.
Yeah.
or
No,
what
it's
was that,
gonna
Thomas
be
Jefferson.
And as the passage gets more passable, I guess, it's like it's a very, very important place. So and China and
strategically, yes, it is.
Yeah, geopolitically, it will be a hotspot very soon.
But Heidi, don't you have any solutions? I feel like we don't have any solutions. We've just vented all our frustrations at this frustrating book, which is showing us so many problems. Do we have any solutions?
Were you asking me?
Yes. I want you to find
you on the spot.
You're on the hot seat.
No, I thought you said my name before you started in with that.
I heard that too. I'm curious to see what Heidi has to offer. Like the whole world can now. Our faith is in your hands.
I've learned a lot from listening to you. Those of you who have more experience and and more of a historical context for this particular night in this capital city in Greenland. And you know more about historical kinds of things than I do, having to do with this area. So when I read this, I thought this could happen anywhere.
Yeah.
It's not a story that is just specific or unique to the capital of Greenland. You could, it's a snapshot. I don't think that it's meant to be more than a snapshot of these individuals in this situation and how they're conducting their lives.
Mm.
So I know I'm looking at it very superficially. I worked with young people when I was much younger, and it was, you know, here, obviously here in the United States, in Madison, and they went through the same kinds of things.
Mhm.
And I just feel like that was, it's almost a universal story in some ways in bigger cities. Not saying that Madison is such a big city, but in my experience in working with young people in Madison, their lives were very much like this. So that I can't solve any problems, but I'm telling you that's how I read the book.
I
I
appreciate
think
that.
the
Yeah.
genre of the book is young adult fiction. I think it's young adult fiction, and
Yeah.
that's in a country where your books aren't going to be banned.
Mhm.
But I think that that's what it is, the genre. So when you ask what the audience is, I think it is young adults that are going through similar identity situations.
No, I think snapshot was a
Yeah.
great description
Yeah.
of the book. I really do. Yeah, it's just a snapshot of these particular individuals rather than some weighty tome. Yeah.
Yeah. And a relatable one. And I
Yeah.
love it that you say it could happen anywhere, because that's okay. Why we have to open our eyes everywhere. Desiree, you want to have the last word?
I would just love to say that, yes, it's a universal story. I really like that point. And I feel like a lot of the books, if not all of them, have been very universal in
Mhm.
the themes that we have dealt with, but in a Danish cultural setting. And I know I speak for you too, Nete, but I'll just say that I've really appreciated this opportunity, because it's not just a Danish book club. It's a book club where we deal with issues that are universal in terms of feelings and emotions and things that we experience in life. And it's been a privilege. I hope we will be back. It's been a
Oh, I hope so.
very
Yes.
big privilege.
Yeah.
This has been a fabulous book club, the best one
Yeah.
I've ever attended.
Thank you so much, everybody. I mean, I can't thank you enough for being here and sharing your insight and your wisdom. We have, Desiree and I, we have enjoyed it tremendously. So yes, we're keeping our fingers crossed and hope to see you again in the fall with another exciting reading list. But until then, take care, everybody. Thank you.